3 weeks passed. The station was repaired. The refugees were processed. Life continued, as it always does, even after disaster. Katie recovered slowly. The burns on her back healed, leaving behind a pattern of scars that would mark her forever. Her arm mended, though it ached when the weather system cycled through their artificial seasons. Her lungs grew stronger each day, until she no longer needed the respirator, until she could breathe on her own again. She returned to work on light duties. She could not lift heavy objects or work long shifts, but she could sit with the children, read to them, help them with their meals. It was enough. It was more than enough. Lyra was always beside her. The tiny girl had transformed in the weeks since the fire. She no longer hid when Katie entered a room. She no longer trembled or cried or scratched her own arms. Instead, she followed Katie everywhere, like a small blue shadow, never more than a few feet away. She held Katie's hand during medical rounds. She sat in Katie's lap during rest periods, curling up against the human's chest and falling asleep to the sound of her heartbeat. She ate her meals only when Katie was nearby, taking food from the human's hands without a trace of fear. The other Velari children watched this change with wonder. If Lyra, who had been the most terrified of them all, could learn to trust the human, then perhaps they could too. One by one, they began approaching Katie. They asked her questions in their musical language, and she answered in her clumsy but improving Velari. They showed her their games and their songs. They let her braid their hair and check their temperatures and tell them stories about Earth. The fear that had gripped them for generations began to loosen its hold. Not completely, not all at once, but slowly, like ice melting in spring, the terror faded and something new took its place. News came from the Galactic Council. The Velari refugees had been approved for resettlement. A peaceful colony world had been found for them, a place with gentle seasons and fertile soil and no predators larger than a house cat. Transport ships would arrive within the week. The Velari celebrated. After so much loss and so much suffering, they finally had a place to call home. They would rebuild. They would plant new gardens and raise new children and sing new songs beneath unfamiliar stars. The nightmare was ending. A new dream was beginning. But Lyra did not celebrate with the others. On the day before the transport ships arrived, she disappeared for several hours. Katie searched the station in a panic, her heart pounding, her thoughts filled with terrible possibilities. She finally found Lyra in one of the cargo bays, sitting alone among stacks of supply crates, her small hands wrapped around something she had hidden in her clothing. Katie sat down beside her. She did not ask questions. She simply waited. Lyra looked up at her with those enormous violet eyes. Then she held out her hands and showed Katie what she was holding. It was a stone. Small and round and pale blue, about the size of a marble. It seemed ordinary at first, but when Lyra turned it in the light, Katie saw patterns inside it. Swirls of color that shifted and flowed like living things. Beautiful, mysterious, unlike anything Katie had ever seen. "This is from my world," Lyra said. She spoke in English now. Her accent was thick and her grammar was imperfect, but she had been practicing. She wanted Katie to understand her without translation. "My mother gave it to me. She told me it holds the dreams of our ancestors. She told me to keep it safe forever." Katie felt her throat tighten. "It is beautiful, Lyra. It is the only thing I have left from her. The only thing from my home." Lyra looked at the stone for a long moment. Then she held it out toward Katie. "I want you to have it." Katie shook her head. "I cannot take that. It is too precious. It is all you have left of your mother. That is why I want you to have it," Lyra said. Her voice was steady and sure, more mature than her 7 years should allow. "My people give these stones only to family, only to those we trust with our hearts. You saved me. You protected me. You loved me even when I was afraid. She pressed the stone into Katie's hand. You are my big protector. You are my family now. Katie tried to speak, but no words came. Tears rolled down her cheeks, the same happy tears she had cried in the medical bay weeks ago. She closed her fingers around the stone and felt its warmth against her palm. Thank you, she whispered. Thank you, Lyra. The transport ships arrived the next morning. The Valari refugees gathered their belongings and prepared to board. Katie stood at the edge of the loading dock, watching them file past, her heart heavy with the knowledge that this was goodbye. Elder Mavis approached her. The old Valari looked different today, lighter, younger, as if the promise of a new home had lifted years from her shoulders. Nurse Morrison, she said, I have a request. Katie blinked. Of course, anything. The Valari Settlement Council has discussed this at length. We have decided that our new colony needs a medical advisor. Someone who understands both our physiology and human medicine. Someone who can help us integrate with the wider galaxy. Someone who can bridge the gap between our people and yours. Mavis smiled. We would like that person to be you. Katie stared at her. You want me to come with you? To live on your new world? It would be a permanent position. You would have a home among us. You would be one of us. Mavis glanced toward the loading dock, where Lara stood waiting, watching Katie with hopeful eyes. I think there is someone who would be very happy if you said yes. Katie looked at Lyra. The tiny girl was practically vibrating with anticipation. A luminescent skin glowing brighter than Katie had ever seen it. She thought about Earth. She thought about the life she had left behind. The comfortable apartment, the familiar streets, the friends and family she had not seen in years. She thought about everything she would be giving up. If she said yes, then she thought about Lyra, about the way the small hand fit in hers, about the weight of that tiny body against her chest. About the stone in her pocket, warm and precious, a gift from a child who had learned to trust. Yes, Katie said. Yes, I will come with you. Lyra ran toward her. Katie knelt down and caught her in a hug, lifting her off the ground and spinning her around while the tiny girl laughed with pure joy. The other Valari children gathered around them, reaching out to touch Katie's arms and shoulders, welcoming her into their midst. The boarding call sounded. Katie sat Lyra down and took her hand. Together, they walked toward the transport ship. The Valari refugees parted before them, smiling, nodding, some of them weeping with happiness. Katie Morrison, human nurse from Earth, stepped onto the ship that would carry her to a new life among people who had once feared her kind more than death itself. Lara held her hand the entire way. The ship lifted off from horizon's edge and turned toward the stars. Through the observation window, Katie watched the station grow smaller and smaller until it was just another light in the darkness. She thought about everything that had brought her here. The pain and the fear and the fire. The patience and the hope and the love. Lyra climbed into her lap and looked up at her with those beautiful violet eyes. Are we going home? She asked. Katie smiled and held her close. Yes, little one. We are going home. Outside, the stars wheeled past in their ancient dance, cold and distant and eternal. But inside the ship, surrounded by the soft glow of Valari's skin and the warmth of a child who had learned to trust, Katie Morrison felt something she had not felt in a very long time. She felt like she belonged. Some bonds are forged in fire. Some trust is earned through sacrifice. And some families are not born of blood, but of choice, built one small act of kindness at a time, until the walls between strangers become bridges between hearts. This is how worlds change. Not through war or conquest, but through courage, through patience, through the simple, stubborn refusal to let fear win. This is the story of how one tiny alien girl learned to trust a human. This is the story of how that human found her home among the stars. The emergency medical bay was bright and clean and filled with the soft beeping of machines. Katie lay on a treatment bed, wrapped in healing bandages from her neck to her waist. Her skin was raw and red where the burns had been worst. Her left arm was held immobile in a support frame, the bones knitting slowly back together. A respirator covered her nose and mouth, helping her damaged lungs pull in air. She had been unconscious for 2 days. Dr. Samuel Grant stood beside her bed, reviewing her charts on a tablet. The damage was extensive. Third-degree burns across 60% of her back. A fractured arm. Cracked ribs. Severe smoke inhalation. It would take weeks for her to recover fully. The scars would last forever, but she would live. Against all odds, Katie Morrison would live. Outside the medical bay, the Valari refugees had gathered. Word had spread quickly through the station. The human nurse had run into a collapsing building to save a Valari child. She had shielded the girl with her own body. She had carried her through fire and debris. She had nearly died. The Valari did not know what to make of this. For thousands of years, they had been taught to fear beings like Katie. The shape of her body triggered instincts older than memory. But this woman had done something that no monster would ever do. She had sacrificed herself for one of their children. Elder Mavis pushed through the crowd and entered the medical bay. Dr. Grant nodded to her and stepped aside. The old Valari approached Katie's bed and stood there for a long moment, studying the human's bandaged form. "She will recover?" Mavis asked. "Yes," Dr. Grant said. "It will take time, but she will be all right." Mavis nodded slowly. "Good. That is good." She turned and left the medical bay. The gathered Valari parted before her, their eyes following her with questions they were afraid to ask. Mavis returned to the refugee quarters and found Lyra sitting alone in a corner, her knees pulled up to her chest. Her arms wrapped around herself. Mavis sat down beside the tiny girl. "How are you feeling, little one?" Lyra did not answer at first. Her violet eyes stared at nothing, unfocused and distant. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. "She burned." "Yes," Mavis said. "She burned because of me. She got hurt because of me." Mavis reached out and took Lyra's small hand in her own. "She got hurt protecting you. There's a difference." Lyra looked at the elder with confusion in her eyes. "Why? Why did she do it?" "I was not kind to her. I was afraid of her. I ran away every time she came near me. Why would she hurt herself for someone who treated her like a monster?" Mavis was quiet for a moment, gathering her thoughts. Then she began to speak. "Long ago, before the Karth came, our ancestors had friends among the larger species. There were gentle giants who shared our world, who protected us from predators, who taught us how to build and grow and dream. We lived together in peace for many generations." Lyra listened with wide eyes. She had never heard this story before. "When the Karth came," Mavis continued, "those gentle giants fought for us. They stood between our people and the hunters. Many of them died defending us. In the end, they were all gone. The Karth killed them, one by one, until only we remained." Mavis squeezed Lyra's hand. "We remember the Karth because they taught us fear. But we forgot the giants who loved us because remembering them was too painful. We let fear erase our gratitude. We let terror destroy our hope." She looked toward the medical bay, toward the human who lay healing within. "Perhaps it is time to remember again. Perhaps not all giants are monsters. Perhaps some of them have been waiting all these centuries for a chance to prove it." Lyra thought about Katie's face. She thought about the soft blankets and the glowing toys and the lullabies sung in broken Valari. She thought about strong arms wrapped around her, shielding her from falling debris, carrying her through fire. "I want to see her," Lyra said. Mavis nodded and stood. She led Lyra through the corridors to the medical bay. The nurses looked uncertain when they approached, but Mavis spoke to them quietly, and they stepped aside. Lyra entered the medical bay and stopped. Katie looked different like this, lying down, wrapped in bandages, breathing through a machine. She looked smaller somehow, weaker, more fragile. She looked like someone who could be hurt, someone who could be broken, someone who could die. Lyra walked slowly toward the bed. Each step was difficult, not because of fear, but because of something else, something heavier. She did not have a word for it yet, but she would learn. The word was guilt. The word was grief. The word was love. She reached the bed and stood on her toes to see over the edge. Katie's face was peaceful in sleep. Her chest rose and fell with each mechanical breath. Her hand lay open on the blanket beside her, palm up, fingers relaxed. Lyra looked at that hand. She remembered how it had felt when Katie gathered her up in the burning corridor. Strong but gentle, firm but careful. A hand that could crush her, but chose instead to carry her. A hand that could hurt her, but chose instead to protect her. Lyra climbed onto the bed. She was careful not to touch the bandages or disturb the machines. She curled up beside Katie's uninjured arm and pressed herself against the human side. She was so small that she barely took up any space at all. Then she reached out and wrapped her. Tiny fingers around Katie's hand. The human skin was warm. Lyra could feel the pulse beneath it, steady and strong. She closed her eyes and listened to Katie breathe. She stayed there through the night. The nurses came and went, checking on Katie, adjusting her medications. They saw the tiny Valari girl curled up beside their patient, and they said nothing. They simply smiled and let her be. Sometime in the early hours of the morning, Katie woke. Her eyes opened slowly, confused at first, then focusing. She felt something warm against her side. She felt small fingers wrapped around her own. She turned her head and saw Lyra sleeping beside her. The tiny girl was not trembling. She was not hiding. She was not crying. She was simply there, peaceful and calm, holding Katie's hand like it was the most natural thing in the world. Katie smiled. It hurt to smile, hurt to move any part of her damaged body, but she did it anyway. Tears rolled down her cheeks, but they were good tears. Happy tears. The kind of tears that come when something broken finally starts to heal. She squeezed Lyra's fingers very gently, so gently that it was barely a squeeze at all. Then she closed her eyes and fell back asleep, her hand still wrapped around the tiny girl who had finally found the courage to trust. Outside the window, the stars burned cold and distant in the endless dark. But inside the medical bay, two hearts beat together, one large and one small, and both of them were warm. The solar flare struck without warning. One moment, the station was quiet and peaceful, its lights humming steadily, its systems running smoothly. The next moment, alarms were screaming, and the world was falling apart. Katie was in the medical supply room when it happened. The lights flickered once, twice, then died completely. Emergency power kicked in a few seconds later, casting everything in a dim red glow. She heard explosions in the distance, the groaning of metal under stress, the hiss of escaping atmosphere. She ran. The corridors were chaos. Refugees from a dozen worlds fled in every direction, some crying, some screaming, some frozen in terror. Emergency bulkheads slammed down without warning, sealing sections of the station, trapping people on both sides. Smoke poured from ventilation shafts. The floor shook beneath Katie's feet. She fought her way toward the children's wing. It was 3 levels down and half the station away, but she did not hesitate. Those children were her responsibility. Those children needed her. A bulkhead dropped right in front of her. She skidded to a stop, then turned and found another route. A wall panel exploded beside her, showering her with sparks. She covered her face and kept moving. The smoke grew thicker. Her eyes burned. Her lungs ached. She did not slow down. When she finally reached the children's level, she found devastation. A support beam had collapsed, bringing down part of the ceiling. Debris covered the floor. Small fires burned in the corners, fed by broken wiring and spilled chemicals. The emergency lighting flickered and died, leaving only the orange glow of flames. Katie pulled out her emergency torch and swept it across the room. The sleeping pods were crushed, twisted into unrecognizable shapes. Her heart nearly stopped. Then she heard voices ahead, faint but alive. The children had made it to the emergency shelter at the end of the hall. The automated systems had guided them there when the first alarms sounded, but not all of them. Katie heard a different sound, a small, frightened whimper coming from somewhere beneath the debris. She turned toward it, sweeping her torch through the smoke until the beam found what she was looking for. Lyra. The tiny girl was trapped. A fallen support beam had pinned her sleeping pod to the floor, crushing it partially, trapping her inside. Lyra was alive, but she could not move. Her small hands pushed against the metal above her, but she had no strength. She was too small, too weak, too frightened. Then she saw Katie coming toward her through the smoke. Her violet eyes went wide. Her body began to tremble. Even now, even in this moment, her deepest instincts screamed at her to run. But she could not run. She could not even crawl. All she could do was watch as the giant came closer and closer, growing larger with every step. Katie dropped to her knees beside the ruined pod. She made herself as small as possible, bringing her face down to Lyra's level. The smoke was so thick that she could barely breathe. The heat from nearby fires pressed against her skin. She could hear the ceiling groaning above them, threatening to collapse at any moment. "Lyra," she said. She spoke in Valari, the words clumsy on her tongue but clear enough. "I am not going to hurt you. I am here to help. Please, let me help." Lyra stared at her. Tears streamed down her glowing cheeks. Her whole body shook with terror. She closed her eyes and turned her face away, preparing for pain, preparing for death, preparing for all the horrors she had been taught to expect. Katie gripped the support beam with both hands. It was heavy, far heavier than anything she had ever tried to lift. The metal edges cut into her palms. Her muscles strained and screamed. She pulled with everything she had, with strength she did not know she possessed, with the desperate power of someone who refuses to let a child die. The beam shifted. Just a little. Just enough. "Come on," Katie gasped. She was crying now, tears cutting through the smoke and ash on her face. "Come on." She pulled harder. Something in her shoulder popped. Pain exploded down her arm. She ignored it. She kept pulling. The beam moved. Lyra's pod opened just enough for the tiny girl to squeeze through. Lyra did not move at first. She was frozen, staring up at Katie with those enormous eyes. "Please," Katie whispered. "Please come to me." Lyra hesitated for one eternal moment. Then she crawled forward. She crawled out of the crushed pod and into Katie's waiting arms. Katie gathered her up and held her close. Lyra weighed almost nothing. She was so small, so fragile, a tiny bundle of luminescent skin and trembling limbs. Katie cradled her against her chest and stood up. The ceiling chose that moment to collapse. Katie turned her back to the falling debris and curled her body around Lyra. She became a shield, a wall, a fortress of flesh and bone. Metal and concrete and burning wreckage rained down on her shoulders, her back, her head. She felt impacts like hammer blows. She felt her uniform catch fire. She felt skin burn and bones crack, but she did not let go. She did not fall. She held Lyra, and she stayed on her feet, and she began to walk. The path to the emergency exit was 20 meters long. It might as well have been 20 kilometers. Every step was agony. Fire burned across Katie's back. Smoke filled her lungs until she could barely breathe. The weight of debris pressed down on her, trying to force her to the ground. She kept walking. Lyra pressed her face against Katie's chest. She could feel the human's heartbeat, fast and strong, pounding against her tiny body. She could feel the heat of the flames and the shuddering of Katie's breath. She could feel the arms wrapped around her, holding her tight, keeping her safe. The giant was burning. The giant was broken. The giant was dying. And still the giant carried her. They reached the emergency exit, just as the corridor behind them collapsed completely. Katie stumbled through the door and fell to her knees on the other side. Medical staff rushed toward her, shouting orders, reaching for Lara. Katie would not let go. "She is scared," Katie whispered. Her voice was barely audible, damaged by smoke and pain. "She is so scared. Please be gentle with her. Please." Then her eyes rolled back and she collapsed. Her arms went limp. Lyra tumbled free, landing on the cool floor of the emergency bay, unharmed. Around her, human medics worked frantically to save the woman who had saved her. They cut away her burning uniform. They treated her wounds. They shouted words that Lyra did not understand. But Lyra understood one thing perfectly. The giant had not hurt her. The giant had protected her. The giant had burned and bled and broken herself to keep one tiny Valari girl alive. Lyra sat on the cold floor, surrounded by chaos, and stared at Katie's unconscious face. She did not run. She did not hide. She simply sat there, her small hands pressed against the floor, her violet eyes never leaving the human who had changed everything she thought she knew about the universe. Katie found Elder Mavis in the meditation room on the station's upper level. The old Valari sat cross-legged on a cushion, her eyes closed, her luminescent skin glowing a deep and peaceful blue. She was small like all her kind, but there was a strength in her that seemed larger than her body. She had led her people through the plague and the evacuation. She had held them together when everything fell apart. Katie waited at the door until Mavis opened her eyes. "You have questions," the elder said. Her voice was soft and musical, and she spoke English with only a slight accent. "You want to know about the child?" Katie nodded and stepped inside. She sat down on the floor across from Mavis, folding her long legs beneath her, trying to make herself smaller. It was a habit she had developed over the past week. The Valari seemed more comfortable when she did not tower over them. "Lyra is terrified of me," Katie said. "I have tried everything I can think of. I have been patient and gentle. I have given her space. But she still looks at me like I am a monster. I need to understand why." Mavis was quiet for a long moment. Her violet eyes studied Katie's face, searching for something. Whatever she found seemed to satisfy her, because she nodded slowly and began to speak. "What I am about to tell you is not easy to hear. It is a story my people do not share with outsiders. But you have earned the right to know, I think. You have shown kindness when you did not have to. You have shown patience when others would have given up." Katie leaned forward. "Listening. Thousands of years ago," Mavis said, "my ancestors lived on a world very different from the one we lost to the plague. It was a beautiful world, covered in forests and rivers and mountains that touched the sky. We were happy there. We built cities in the trees and sang songs to the stars. We thought we would live there forever." Her voice grew heavy with old grief. Then the Korath came. Katie had never heard that name before. She waited for Mavis to continue. The Korath were hunters. They traveled from world to world, seeking prey. They were tall and powerful, standing twice the height of my people. They walked on two legs and had warm blood in their veins. Their skin was smooth, and their eyes faced forward, like predators. "Like hunters." Mavis paused. Like humans, Katie felt a cold weight settle in her stomach. The Korath did not see us as people, Mavis continued. They saw us as animals. They hunted us for sport, tracking us through the forests, catching us in nets and cages. They killed millions. They drove us from our homeworld and chased us across the stars. For generations we ran. We hid. We survived. Eventually, the Korath vanished. No one knows why. Perhaps they found other prey. Perhaps they destroyed themselves. But the memory of them lives on in our blood. She looked at Katie with something like pity. When Lyra sees you, she does not see a nurse. She does not see a kind woman who wants to help. She sees the shape of her nightmares. She sees the monster from the stories her parents told her. Every instinct in her body screams at her to run, to hide, to survive. She cannot help it. The fear is older than she is. It is older than any of us. Katie sat in silence for a long time. She thought about Lyra's trembling body, her silent tears, the scratch marks on her arms. The little girl was not being difficult or stubborn. She was fighting a war against her own DNA, a battle programmed into her very cells. I understand, Katie said finally, but I cannot give up on her. She is hurting herself, Mavis. She is barely eating. If I walk away now, she will think she was right to fear me. She will spend the rest of her life believing that every tall species wants to hurt her. Mavis smiled. It was a sad smile, but there was warmth in it. I did not tell you this story so that you would give up. I told you so that you would understand what you are fighting against. Lyra's fear is not a wall. It is an ocean. You cannot climb over it or knock it down. You must swim through it, slowly, one stroke at a time. Katie returned to the children's wing with new determination. She threw herself into learning everything she could about Valari culture. She studied their language, practicing the musical syllables until her throat ached. She learned their customs and their taboos. She discovered that they found direct eye contact threatening, so she began looking slightly to the side when she spoke to them. She learned that they preferred soft lighting and quiet sounds, so she dimmed the lamps in the children's wing and played gentle music during rest periods. The changes were small, but they mattered. The other Valari children began to warm to her. They started speaking to her in their own language, delighted when she answered in broken but recognizable phrases. They let her sit with them during meals. They showed her their toys and their drawings. Lyra watched all of this from a distance. She still would not come near Katie, but she no longer ran away immediately. She would stand in doorways, observing, her violet eyes following Katie's every move. Sometimes she stayed for several minutes before retreating to her pod. Dr. Samuel Grant called Katie into his office one afternoon. He looked tired and worried. The Valari girl, he said. Lyra, her vitals are declining. She is not eating enough. Her body is shutting down. Katie felt her heart clench. What can we do? I have been in contact with a facility in the outer sectors. They have no human staff. If we transfer Lyra there, she might feel safe enough to eat. It might save her life. Katie shook her head before he finished speaking. If we send her away, we are telling her that her fear was justified. We are confirming everything she believes about us. She will never trust a human again. She will spend her entire life running from shadows. She might not have an entire life if we do nothing, Dr. Grant said quietly. Katie stood up. Give me more time, please. I know I can reach her. I just need more time. Dr. Grant looked at her for a long moment. Then he sighed and nodded. That night, Katie sat outside Lyra's pod again. But this time, she did something different. She began to sing. It was a Valari lullaby she had learned from one of the older children, a simple melody about stars and safety and sleep. Her pronunciation was clumsy, and her voice was too deep, but she sang it anyway, soft and slow. letting the words float through the thin wall of the sleeping pod. Inside, Lyra lay very still. She recognized the song. Her mother used to sing it to her before the plague, before everything ended. She had not heard it since. Tears rolled down her glowing cheeks, but they were different tears this time. Not tears of fear. Tears of something else. Something she did not have a name for yet. The giant was singing to her. The monster from her nightmares was singing a Valari lullaby. Lyra did not understand, but for the first time, she wanted to. The refugee station called Horizon's Edge floated in the darkness between two great empires. It was a place for the lost and the broken, a temporary home for those who had nowhere else to go. Thousands of beings from dozens of worlds passed through its corridors each month, carrying nothing but grief and hope in equal measure. Katie Morrison had worked here for 3 years. She was 34 years old, a nurse from Earth who had left behind a comfortable life to help those who needed it most. She had seen suffering in many forms. She had held the hands of dying soldiers and comforted mothers who had lost their children. She thought she understood pain, but nothing had prepared her for the Valari. They arrived on a battered transport ship that barely held together long enough to dock. There were 200 of them, small and fragile, with luminescent skin that glowed faintly blue in the dim light. The tallest among them stood no higher than Katie's waist. Their eyes were large and violet, filled with an ancient sadness that seemed too heavy for such delicate creatures to carry. A plague had destroyed their colony world. The sickness had spread so fast that there was no time to find a cure. Families had watched each other die within hours. These 200 survivors were all that remained of a settlement that once held 50,000 souls. Katie was assigned to the children's section. There were 37 Valari children in her care, orphans whose parents had died during the desperate evacuation. Most of them were quiet and withdrawn, but they accepted the food and medicine she offered. They let her check their vital signs and apply healing patches to their wounds. They did not smile, but they did not run from her either, all except one. Her name was Lyra. She was 7 years old by Valari counting, which made her roughly equivalent to a human child of the same age. She stood barely 2 feet tall, small even among her own kind. Her skin glowed the palest shade of blue, almost white, and her violet eyes were enormous in her thin face. She weighed almost nothing. Katie could have lifted her with one hand, but Lyra would not let Katie anywhere near her. The first time Katie approached with a meal tray, Lyra scrambled backwards so fast that she fell off her sleeping pod. She hit the floor hard and lay there trembling, her tiny hands covering her face, her whole body shaking with terror. Katie froze. She set down the tray and backed away slowly, speaking soft words of comfort that Lyra clearly did not understand or believe that it happened again and again. Every time Katie entered the children's wing, Lyra would hide. She squeezed herself into corners, behind furniture, under beds. She made herself as small as possible, as if hoping she might disappear entirely. When Katie came too close, Lyra would cry. Not loud sobs, but silent tears that ran down her glowing cheeks while her body trembled like a leaf in a storm. The other children noticed. They tried to comfort Lyra, speaking to her in their musical language, but the tiny girl would not be soothed. Her fear of the human was absolute and overwhelming. Katie asked the other nurses if they knew why. A colleague named Dr. Samuel Grant, the station's chief medical officer, gave her a sad look and shook his head. He told her that sometimes trauma ran too deep for logic. The Valari had lost everything. Perhaps Lyra associated Katie with some terrible memory from the evacuation. Perhaps her parents had died in front of her, and something about Katie triggered that pain. But Katie noticed something the others did not. Lyra was not afraid of the station itself. She was not afraid of the machines or the other refugees or even the noise and chaos of the processing center. She was only afraid of Katie. She was only afraid of the human. On the third night, Katie found scratch marks on Lyra's arms. The tiny girl had been hurting herself, digging her small nails into her own luminescent skin until she bled. Katie felt her heart break into pieces. She wanted to scoop Lyra up and hold her close and promise her that everything would be all right. But she knew that doing so would only make things worse. So Katie tried a different approach. She began leaving small gifts outside Lyra's sleeping pod each night. A soft blanket made from the gentlest material she could find. A glowing toy that changed colors when touched. Nutritional treats that the Valari children seemed to enjoy. She left these offerings without a word, placing them carefully on the floor before backing away and disappearing around the corner. In the morning, the gifts were always gone. Lyra took them after Katie left, when she was certain the human was far away. She wrapped herself in the blanket. She held the glowing toy close to her chest while she slept. She ate the treats in tiny bites, savoring each one, but she still would not look at Katie. She still would not let the human come near. Katie refused to give up. She started spending extra hours in the children's wing, not approaching Lyra directly, but simply being present. She would sit in a corner and read reports on her tablet, or help other children with their meals, or organize supplies in the storage cabinets. She moved slowly and spoke softly, never raising her voice, never making sudden gestures. Sometimes she caught Lyra watching her. The tiny girl would peek out from behind a partition, her violet eyes fixed on Katie with an expression that was part fear and part something else. Curiosity, perhaps, or confusion, as if Lyra was trying to solve a puzzle that made no sense to her. One evening, Katie sat on the floor near an injured Valari boy, carefully applying a healing patch to a cut on his forehead. The boy was calm, trusting her completely, even managing a small smile when she finished. Katie smiled back and patted his shoulder gently. When she looked up, Lyra was standing in the doorway. The tiny girl stared at Katie with those enormous violet eyes, watching the way the human touched the boy so carefully, so gently. There was no violence in those hands. There was no cruelty in that smile. For just a moment, Lyra did not look afraid. Then she noticed Katie looking at her, and the spell broke. She turned and ran, disappearing into the maze of sleeping pods, leaving Katie alone with a strange ache in her chest. That night, Katie sat outside Lyra's pod for hours. She did not try to enter. She did not speak or make any sound. She simply sat there, her back against the wall, her eyes closed, her presence a silent promise. Inside the pod, Lyra lay awake, listening to the human breathe. She did not understand why Katie kept trying. She did not understand why this giant creature refused to leave her alone. All her life, she had been taught to fear beings like this. All her life, she had heard the stories. But the blanket was so soft, and the toy glowed so beautifully, and the human had never once tried to hurt her. Lyra pulled the blanket tighter around her small body and closed her eyes. She did not sleep well, but she slept. And in her dreams, for the first time, the giant was not chasing her. The giant was simply sitting there, waiting, patient as the stars.